So the month of May is Mental Health Awareness Month. One of the reasons they started celebrating or noting that month is to destigmatize mental illness. We all have some connection to the pain of mental illness, just like the pain of physical illness. It touches us all, either in our own being or with somebody that we love dearly or someone that we know. And the best thing that we can do is to be open about it, to name it, to continue to bring it out of the shadows, to desecretize mental illness, to do away with the shame that often keeps us from naming it, from talking about it freely, from being open with one another, and for speaking up about our own situation or about a loved one's situation. But today I want to talk about our collective mental health, not from a scientific or a statistical way, but from a spiritual way, through a spiritual lens. The statistics around mental health right now are pretty staggering because of the pandemic. But statistics don't often describe what is going on for so many of us. We've been in this crisis for over a year. And as Pope Francis says, the basic rule of a crisis is that you don't come out of it the same. If you get through it, you come out better or worse, but never the same. Now, one of the reasons we're part of spiritual community is to help each other together to come out better. But that's not always easy. So today we turn to a story from our sacred tradition that Taylor read for us about the man at the pool. And the story says that once a year an angel would descend somehow and stir the waters of the pool. And if you were able to get in the pool at that minute, you were healed from whatever you needed to be healed from. So Jesus is walking near that pool and says to a man, "Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be made well?" Now, perhaps you notice the man does not say a resounding yes right away. In fact, he actually never answers the question. He says, "I have no one to put me in the pool." You know, I've preached on this story so many times over the years, and I've often or mostly looked at the man as not answering the question because perhaps he was so comfortable in his identity, just as he was, that he couldn't even imagine another way. But this year, this time, I looked at the story. I see it through eyes of tenderness and compassion. A colleague of mine reflected on this story recently, and she helped me see it differently. She talked about the obstacles that the man faced trying to get into the pool. Within the man himself, he had been ill for 38 years, and I'm sure by that time, despair had set in, a lack of deservedness even. Probably questioned his own worth. Paralysis can set in, emotional and spiritual paralysis. The obstacles of the community maybe not showing compassion. The obstacles of a social welfare or lack thereof system. Systemic issues, like some we see in the healthcare system in our own country today. And sometimes a religious system can be an obstacle. Theology, belief can be an obstacle rather than a benefit sometimes, especially for some in the larger Christian tradition that stigmatize illness. And then the obstacle of isolation and loneliness, that you get to such a place in your life that you don't even know how to ask for help anymore. You know, friends, we have faced so many obstacles during this pandemic. So we have obstacles for our own mental health. The threat of the virus has dramatically impacted our nervous systems. It's a physiological thing, a physical reality. The threat of the virus set us into that fight or flight response, sent our nervous system into overdrive. And you know what? Our systems haven't recovered from that yet. And what keeps us human, what in previous crises has allowed us to get through, has been our human connection with one another, physical touch, hug, deep listening, being with one another. And that is the very thing that we have not been able to do in this pandemic. In fact, we've had to back away from each other simply to keep each other safe. And that's affected our mental health. And if that weren't enough, I want you to just think of 1 year ago from today, all that we've been through just in this last year, May to May. I mean, think about it. The death of George Floyd and the racial reckoning that has swept across the land. And the deep work that many white people have had to do to actually open our eyes to the reality that people of color have been living with for decades, centuries even. To reckon with our own history and the ignorance that many of us faced about the reality of our own history. And then there was the election. Remember that? Just a few months ago, really. That was pretty stressful. And then, just in January, the insurrection. This is just in 1 year, and then some of us were affected by the fires in the fall. I mean, the list goes on, and our nervous systems remain in overdrive, and that mind-body connection becomes so out of balance. And even though there is light at the end of the tunnel because of the vaccines and the vaccinations, at least here, for many, most people I talk to are exhausted, overwhelmed, stressed out, and almost nervous about being in groups of people. I was talking about this morning at our outside service. You know, I'm an extrovert by nature. And I have felt myself almost have a little social anxiety about being in groups, almost overstimulated. And I can't imagine how much more so for people that are naturally introverted or that may have some social anxiety. We're anticipating navigating a post-pandemic life and not sure what that looks like or how we feel about it or how we will be in it. There's a wonderful New York Times article about 10 days ago written by Adam Grant. And the title is, "There's a name for the blah you're feeling. It's called languishing." Languishing. Not a word we use that often. But he says languishing, by definition, is a state of stagnation and emptiness. It's like looking at life through a foggy windshield. And he points out that there's long-haul COVID. We know this, right? But there's also long-haul emotional symptoms from being in this pandemic. Some of the intense fear and grief of last year is fading for many, but he says the acute state of anguish has given way to a chronic condition of languish. We've gone from anguish to languish. Mental health is often described as when someone feels that they are flourishing. And the lack of mental health or struggling with mental health as having anxiety and depression. But there's a lot in between. And that in between, that kind of void, I think if I asked most people in my life right now, are you flourishing? Most would probably pause. You might not. You may be feeling unmotivated, tired, irritable, critical. We have this American thing where we're supposed to be kind of positive all the time and upbeat. That's part of what we need to do is to destigmatize all that. Destigmatize those who aren't feeling positive and upbeat and who are struggling. And I imagine if I asked you, do you want to be well? Your answer would be yes, but I don't know how quickly that would come to the surface, because the next question quickly on its heels might be, but how? How? So I have kind of a spiritual suggestion, or some spiritual food, I hope. A mantra that I invite you to use this week. It's just 3 simple words: ground, grace, and gratitude. First of all, ground. It's hard to be in your bodies when there's a lack of physical touch. But we can tend and befriend ourselves, even a simple like feeling your feet on the ground and putting your own hand on your heart and taking a deep breath so that there's self-awareness to stop for a moment. It may be stepping outside and feeling the wind on your face or the sun on your face. Stepping out in your front yard and just noticing the leaves, the flowers blooming, the life teeming around with the bees and the birds and the ants and the barking dogs next door. That awareness, and to acknowledge what is going on and to name it. And that self-awareness then allows us to choose how we will respond to whatever stimuli is coming in. That space. It's so hard sometimes to name what is going on. I know in my own life, I try to be positive and enthusiastic and strong, and we'll get through this. It's really hard for me to name those days and those times when I don't feel that at all. When I feel beaten down. When I feel for moments like life is conspiring against me. But only in naming it and being self-aware can I then choose to respond to whatever circumstance or to respond to others in a way that is beneficial not only for my well-being, but for their well-being. So ground. More important than ever since we've had such a loss of physical touch. And the second thing, grace. Self-compassion. I've been reminded a few times this week when my first response was to be irritable or frustrated or angry. I've been gently reminded by someone who loves me to say, well, that person might just be feeling vulnerable. And then I can feel that compassion begin to come and flood my heart towards that person And then I try to have that compassion for myself. Grace. I really try to make that my mantra these days. We're all dealing with so much. Just give people grace, Penny. Give yourself grace. And when I can ground and be self-aware, then I can choose. I can serve up compassion rather than criticism. I can choose to be tender rather than tense. Ground. Offer grace. And lastly, and always, gratitude. Gratitude connects us in a certain way to the spirit of goodness and love in the world. Gratitude, just being grateful, is a prayer itself. Gratitude helps us see and acknowledge our small wins. Gratitude helps us recognize those moments in life that can help us feel human again. A cup of tea from a neighbor or a friend. A walk with a dog. A French pastry. That which feeds our souls and our bodies. Because gratitude helps our heart open like a flower. And when our heart is open, when we're grounded and when we're able to receive grace for ourselves and give grace to others, the obstacles start to diminish. And we can see our way collectively and individually to more wholeness, to well-being. And we can have deep compassion for those who struggle, for surely there are plenty of reasons why so many are struggling. We've been through so much trauma. And so even as we experience here some light at the tunnel, we know that other countries are not, and many people still here are not. But while some of us can see a little light at the end of the tunnel, to look to more wholeness, to this week let ground, grace, and gratitude be your mantra. When you want to react to something, to take a step back, to allow that space between stimulus and response, because in that space is choice. Choice for your own well-being and choice for another's well-being. We can go from anguish to languish to love. And God's heart is always open to us. And so, whoever you are, wherever you're listening in from or whatever moment, real time or later, know that you will be found, that you are loved, that you are accepted just as you are in this moment. And this week, let ground and grace and gratitude guide you. Amen.